these 25 announcements. So I will ask each of you, as you give your announcements, that you give the announcements for the areas that you're responsible for. So the first 5 are for Madam AG. Madam AG, you have the floor. Oh, who is she? Oh, yeah, she's there.
Madam President?
Yes, Madam AG, you have the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, I hereby present for the information of Senate the following emergency powers regulations as made by His Excellency the Governor under provisions of the Emergency Powers Act 1963, namely the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Shelter-in-Place Regulations 2020, the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Shelter-in-Place Amendment Regulations 2020, the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Shelter-in-Place Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2020, the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Shelter-in-Place Amendment Number 3 Regulations 2020, and the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Continuing Precautions Regulations 2020.
Thank you, Madam AG. For the next series, it's in the name of Senator Campbell. Senator Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I hereby present for the information of Senate the following subsidiary legislative items as made by the Minister of Finance under provisions of the relevant statutory acts. The Public Treasury Administration and Payments Temporary Unemployment Benefit Regulations 2020, the Public Treasury Administration and Payments Temporary Unemployment Benefit Amendment Regulations 2020, the Customs Duty Bermuda Paper Company Limited Remission Order 2020, the Customs Tariff Head of Department Customs Certificate 2020, the Customs Tariff Approved Business Amendment Notice 2020, and the Customs Tariff Approved Businesses Amendment Number 2 Notice 2020.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. And the next will be presented by Madam AG.
Yes, Madam President.
Of Senator Simmons Wade. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I hereby present for the information of Senate the following subsidiary legislative items as made by the Minister responsible for health under provisions of the relevant statutory acts, namely the Public Health COVID-19 Regulations 2020, the Public Health COVID-19 Amendment Regulations 2020, the Public Health COVID-19 Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2020, the Occupational Safety and Health COVID-19 Temporary Regulations 2020, the Residential Care Homes and Nursing Homes Amendment Regulations 2020, the Nursing and Midwifery, if I pronounce that right, Amendment Rules 2020, and the Public Health Communicable Disease Order 2020, and e-copies of these items are available on Senator's tablets. I also, Madam President, will continue, and I present for the information of Senate the following subsidiary legislative items as made by the Minister responsible for health on provisions of the relevant statutory acts, namely the Quarantine Communicable Disease Order 2020, the Quarantine Travel Ban Order 2020, the Quarantine Travel Ban Number 2 Amendment Order 2020, the Quarantine COVID-19 Order 2020, the Quarantine Incoming Traveler Order 2020, and the Quarantine Extension of Quarantine Order 2020.
Thank you, Madam AG. We'll now move on item number 6 on the agenda, which is notices of motion. Senator Campbell, I believe you will present on this. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I hereby present for the consideration of Senate the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Refund Temporary Regulations 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister of Finance under the provisions of Section 24(9)(c) and 69 of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act 1998. And I give notice that at a later point in the meeting, I will move that the said draft regulations be approved.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, sorry, and you have a second one?
That's correct.
You have the floor.
I also hereby present for the consideration of Senate the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister of Finance under the provisions of sections 24(9)(b) and 69 of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act 1998. And I again give notice that at a later point in the meeting, I will move that the said draft regulations be approved. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Item number 7 on our orders of the day is the petitions. There are none. Item number 8, statements. There are none. Item number 9, introduction of bills. There are none. Item number 10, the first reading of public bills. The following public bill has been received from the Honorable House of Assembly and is now read for the first time. Its title is, respectively, the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020. And this item will be taken up on the orders of the day. Item number 11, first reading of private bills. There are none. Item number 12, question and question period. There are none. Item number 13, orders of the day. So the orders of the day is to be taken up by the Senate, and that is the second reading of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020. Senator Campbell, I believe this is your bill. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the provisions of Standing Order 25 be granted so that the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I am pleased to provide for the consideration of the Senate the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020. Madam President, senators will be aware that the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act 1998, the Act, provides for the establishment, administration, and regulation of private sector occupational pensions in Bermuda. The Act became operational on the 1st of January 2000, and over the years, a number of amendments to the Act and regulations have been introduced to provide for such matters as registration of plans, plans for self-employed persons, pension fund investments, financial hardship with withdrawals, small pension refunds, and enhancements to the Pension Commission's regulatory and supervisory powers, to name a few. Madam President, the Pension Commission has provided the following plan statistics as at the 31st of December 2019. There are 27,961 estimated number of plan members. The number of plans are 3,126, with 3,111 being defined contribution plans and 15 being defined benefit plans. Approximately 4.1 billion US dollars of assets are in the plans. And obviously, Madam President, given the impact of the COVID-19 on various markets, that value is likely to be less than that as we currently speak. There are 303 self-employed plans, 6 approved third-party plan administrators, US dollars 946 million of assets in local prescribed retirement products, and Bermuda dollars 32.8 million in total financial hardship payments since the inception in 2010. Madam President, let me take this opportunity to provide more specific details on the 32.8 million in financial hardship payments. Financial hardship applications as of the 31st of December 2019, there were a total number of applications received since August 2010 of 3,354. Of those, 2,799 were approved and 396 were declined. We had a further 159 applications that were pending and or withdrawn. As far as the type of application, Madam President, we had 1,076 applications for eligible educational expenses. We had 448 applications for imminent threat of loss of principal residence. We had 1,091 applications for imminent eviction from home or rental arrears, and we had 184 approved applications for eligible medical expenses. Madam President, it is pleasing to know the hardship withdrawal provisions under the Act have assisted many families over the years and clearly validates the benefits of this social policy initiative. It should also be noted that the 32.8 million withdrawn since inception only represents approximately 0.8 of 1% of the $4.1 billion in plan assets. The intent of the legislation was for persons to use hardship withdrawals under the National Pension Scheme as the very last recourse. The statistics provide verification that this policy objective is being met. Madam President, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on economic activity and social conditions in Bermuda. Government swiftly introduced a temporary unemployment benefit for employees laid off as a result of the pandemic. To further assist the unemployed, those underemployed, or those otherwise struggling financially as a result of the economic deterioration, the government is proposing to permit former members of defined contribution pension plans and members and policyholders of local retirement products to be able to voluntarily withdraw up to $12,000 as specified in the applicable regulations. Madam President, this will be a one-time withdrawal. I did mention former members of defined contribution plans. Madam President, with your indulgence, I will expand on that a little for the listening audience, just in case they're unsure what that means. And that would mean, Madam President, with your indulgence.
Certainly, you can carry on, sir.
That would mean a former member is a person who has terminated employment or membership in a pension plan. Thus, a person may not yet have transferred their funds either to another company pension plan or local retirement product. This will enable them to apply to receive their $12,000 from their previous employer's pension plan. So I thought we would provide that clarification, Madam President.
Good.
Madam President, the Pension Commission has been consulted and is supportive of the proposal in light of the financial hardships impacting members and former members of pension plans. Furthermore, the Commission has made a number of suggestions on the contents of the proposed amendment and regulations in order to make the provision of such withdrawals as efficient as possible. It should be noted, Madam President, that the regulations have been modeled after existing regulations in a similar area. Madam President, the government is mindful of the long-term implications on a plan member's retirement income in permitting such withdrawals. However, this must be balanced against the immediate and urgent needs in our community that have resulted from this unexpected crisis.
Okay, that's
Madam President, the government also recognizes that there will be those who do not support the proposed refund. However, we can all agree that one of the principles behind saving and investing is to save for a rainy day. Well, Madam President, I suggest that one of those rainy days is upon us, and the government is compelled to respond to provide members with greater access to their pension funds, should they choose to do so. And I will repeat that, Madam President, should they choose to do so. It is voluntary, and plan members should only apply for the refund if it is needed. Madam President, recognizing the importance for plan members to use these and any other refunds from their pension plans wisely, the minister will be asking the Pension Commission to engage in a financial awareness campaign to assist plan members in their financial planning and use of such funds. Madam President, the bill also seeks to make a few minor amendments to the existing act, namely to exempt multi-employer plans from the existing small pensions refund, as it has been recognized that such plans may already provide for a small pension refund, and the imposition of a mandated amount greater than that already established under such plans would likely result in financial harm to the pension fund, and to adjust the provision of the existing 25% lump sum refund at retirement to apply to defined contribution plans or local retirement products only. This is necessary as defined benefit plans would be harmed if such a refund was made mandatory. Furthermore, Madam President, employers would be financially responsible for any resulting funding shortfalls in such plans, and the imposition of such would not be just or equitable. However, Madam President, the Act permits a defined benefit plan to voluntarily permit a refund of a member's contributions accumulated prior to the 1st of January 2000, and I am pleased to advise that a number of defined benefit plans already provide for such refunds. Thus, members of such plans may still be able to receive a similar refund at retirement. Madam President, the proposed amendments contained in this bill are timely and necessary and consistent with pension provisions and legislation being introduced in other jurisdictions. Madam President, if you allow, I would like to turn to the specifics of specific clauses in the bill that's being presented.
Certainly you may, Senator Campbell. Carry on.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Clause 2 amends Section 24, restrictions on refunds. And the key thing here, Madam President, is the Principal Act is amended by inserting the following paragraph B, following after paragraph B, which is paragraph C, which includes a lump sum in the case of a defined contribution pension plan or a local retirement product of up to $12,000 during such period as may be prescribed. And once we get to the regulations, Madam President, we'll see that the application for this $12,000 one-time lump sum refund must be made prior to the 30th of June 2021. Clause 3 amends Section 35 of the Act, small pensions. And Section 35 of the Principal Act is amended by inserting the following after subsection 2. And this would be this section does not apply in respect of a multi-employer pension plan. Clause 4, Madam President, amends Section 19B of the National Pension Scheme, Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2019. This is repealed and replaced with the following. Under new 19B, under a new, under a new 19B,
Yes.
a lump sum where the member or former member has attained normal retirement age and has retired of up to 25% of his account balance in the case of a defined contribution plan or a local retirement product as may be prescribed. And finally, Madam President, Clause 5 allows for commencement on such day as the minister appoints by notice published in the official gazette.
Thank you, Senator Campbell.
So, Madam President, in closing,
Fine. Carry on.
on behalf of the minister, I would like to thank all of those persons within the Pension Commission, the Attorney General's chambers, and the Ministry of Finance, who have assisted with the development of this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Would any senator care to speak on this bill?
Yes, Madam President, I would like to reply.
Senator Jones, you have the floor.
Good morning, Madam President.
Good morning.
Good morning to my fellow senators, and good morning to the listening public. First of all, let me extend my gratitude to the Ministry of Finance that afforded us to be able to sit with the administrators of the pension fund. I guess it was a week ago, and it was very informative and helped us to be able to frame an understanding of what is being required of the Pension Commission, and how our people that are in a position of hardship can get assistance. Now, Madam President, this amendment that the government has tabled as an option for residents in this country to apply for hardship withdrawals from one's pension of a maximum of $12,000, and for those who are over 65 and officially retired, access of up to 25% of their pension funds, is to be commended, and we support this bill. We know that since the launching of the National Pension Scheme Act 1998, where it has been mandatory for employers to set up a pension plan for its employees as a supplementary scheme to the government social insurance plan for all retirees, has gone a long way in creating financial security for those who plan to retire and maintain a quality of life equal to what they enjoyed while part of the workforce. Fast forward to 2010, when the National Pension Scheme financial hardship legislation and its regulations were passed and allowed those in our community who experienced hardship in the form of mortgage and rental arrears or medical and further education challenges to obtain financial assistance. The compassion displayed in the launching of this act by the legislature has resulted in approximately $32 million being provided for those who were in need to be helped in the backdrop of approximately $4.1 billion that now stands as the account balance of the private pension fund. While discussing this amendment with families and friends, it became increasingly obvious that for those who felt that government should limit the availability of this cash advance from one's pension and encourage people in need to forego the opportunity with an eye to secure their senior years, fell into the almost a pensioner to those who had already retired group. There was another age group, that of those who were under 40 years old, who have not even considered their retirement or the need to pay any attention to pension schemes and the like. Then finally, there's the 40 to retirement age group, who are more in tune with their retirement preparation, who, if in need due to this pandemic, are in favor of the $12,000 hardship withdrawal and are prepared to take it even further. Why not extend to us the option of withdrawing up to 25% of our pension, as has been made available to pensioners, they say? After all, it's my money, and I can use it to make an investment in a startup business, down payment on a house, etc., that can help stimulate the economy. Furthermore, they say, pensioners are more likely to pay off existing debt rather than turn those funds into an economic vehicle to stimulate the economy. It is important that we have a full appreciation of the purpose of pensions, which is to set aside funds during one's wage-earning days to sustain you during your declining years. The hardship withdrawal allowance is meant to cover you during a rainy day. This pandemic is significantly more than a rainy day. It is more like a tsunami. So extraordinary times requires extraordinary action, the amendment that the government has tabled today. Madam President, I am reminded of another crisis that struck the world during the 9/11 takedown of the Twin Towers in New York. All the world stopped what they were doing to watch cable and network news replay the airplane crashing into those buildings. What the 9/11 tragedy succeeded in doing was to forever change the way we travel. This coronavirus pandemic will forever change the way we live. What the people in this country are looking for from us as parliamentarians is to see how much we are willing to share the burden of the cost to sustain those who are out of work. They know that the public purse is stretched to the max and that we can ill afford to go into further debt beyond the $3 billion threshold. We senators and MPs must be willing to step up to the plate and forfeit part of our salaries as a sign of solidarity for those in our community that are destitute due to this pandemic. I, for one, am willing to pledge a portion of my salary to demonstrate my commitment to the cause. What a bold bipartisan move that would be. In addition to this action, this PLP government should make a commitment to slash its spending to facilitate the emergency spending that has been necessary at this tumultuous time in our history. In the private sector, businesses realize that the most effective way to impact their bottom line when revenue decreases is to cut back on their high-ticket items on the expenditure side of the ledger, and that is salaries. Unfortunately, we have seen this happen in our business community from the top down. The Premier and his cabinet must lead the way, and the rest of us will be forced to follow. Madam President, another source of government salary savings is like the proverbial elephant in the room. Legislation has allowed for the governing administration to hire political consultants who, by and large, add another layer of expertise in the area of communications for certain ministries.
Madam President?
Yes, hello?
Yes, Madam President, Senator Caesar, point of order.
You have a point of order. Senator Caesar, you have the floor.
Thank you. Whilst we appreciate my fellow Senator Jones' remarks, I would like to caution that he's due to speak to the specific legislation being debated, and I believe that he has gone beyond the scope of that legislation with his discussion.
Senator Jones?
Madam President, I would submit to you that in an attempt for the government to look for ways to be able to facilitate the expenditures that has transpired due to this pandemic, we are just putting before the government suggestions by which they can make this happen. I believe the entire public would like to hear from this side of the political aisle ways and means by which we can help and suggest to the government ways and means by which they can help to undergird this tough times that we're going through. I will continue, Madam President.
Carry on, Senator Jones.
At present, the government has budgeted $2.2 million in salaries for the 26 staff members employed in the Department of Communications. Its political consultants make annual salaries in excess of $100,000 each, an overkill in my opinion. Now, the government has claimed to have found approximately $60 million in savings in its 2020-21 budget. So here's at least another $500,000 that the government can save. That $500,000 would represent at least 83 persons receiving the maximum amount allowed for an unemployment benefit at $500 per week for 12 weeks. This government...
There's a point of order, Senator Jones. Hold on.
I will yield.
Madam President, I'm making the same point of order that was made by Senator Caesar. Senator Jones is still failing to speak to the legislation at hand.
Senator Jones, you are to speak to the legislation at hand. Okay, I've given considerable leeway to you, and I would like you now to speak to the legislation, please.
Yes, Madam President, I will continue. This legislation being tabled today demonstrates that this government has the fortitude and compassion to allow your money to help you now while you are in a jam. When it comes to the creative powers needed for this government to stimulate an economy and control its expenditures during normal times, it comes up woefully short. Throw in a crisis like COVID-19, and you can understand why we don't feel warm and fuzzy that this government will be able to navigate this ship called Bermuda through these turbulent waters. Madam President, in this new era of bipartisanship, where we as parliamentarians extend our hands across the political aisle to combat this invisible enemy in a unified fashion, needs to be applauded and continued. But that does not absolve the opposition's duty to hold this government to account to the financial decisions that it has to make to steer us through this crisis. Does it put us at odds with this PLP government? Not at all. What it succeeds in doing is applying the necessary pressure on a government that, although legitimately focuses on providing health solutions, must also be focused on the economic solutions that this pandemic poses to the financial health of this island, not only today, but also for the future. In closing, Madam President, I do have a few questions that I would like to submit to the Junior Minister of Finance, if I may.
Carry on, you may.
Can the Junior Minister of Finance inform the Senate what a member of a pension scheme must do to apply for this hardship withdrawal and the approximate waiting time for their funds, if approved by the Commission, to be made available? Secondly, can the Junior Minister of Finance share with the Senate the logic behind the decision to make June 2021 as a reasonable time frame for the sunset clause? And finally, there has been an inquiry from the public from a case where a pensioner who has taken early retirement has purchased an annuity-based pension scheme susceptible to market forces. They were told that under their conditions that they were ineligible to draw the $12,000. Can the Junior Minister confirm that this is the case, and if there are other factors that will prohibit members of these pension schemes to be unable to withdraw their funds? And with that, Madam President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Senator Jardine, you have indicated you would like to speak. You now you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First, I want to thank Senator Campbell for the interesting information, useful information he provided when he opened his discussion on this particular bill. It was interesting to see that over 1,000 of the applications up to December of last year were for education amounts, which I think is encouraging in some respects that the amount of money that is being put aside for education indicates the importance that people are placing on funding education. And so although it's obviously alarming to see that need, it's good to see that 40% of those applications appear to be for educational need. It was also, one of the questions I had, which Senator Campbell was able to answer in his opening remarks, was the defined benefit plans and their ability to draw on monies accumulated prior to January the 1st, 2000. So that does provide those individuals who do have funds prior to that period of time to have access to those funds on an emergency basis. Madam President, although I support this piece of legislation, I always sound the note of caution here that the day of reckoning will come when people retire, and I'm particularly talking about the 12,000 lump sum amount, which people can draw before retirement. And the day of reckoning will come when they will retire. And although I understand the urgent need that many people have to get access to this money, I would certainly sound the note of caution, and that is, my advice to you is don't want, unless you absolutely, as a matter of urgency, need those funds. Because, as I say, we have requirements for those funds, as those of us who are now retired find out. And want to make sure there is something there to live on in Bermuda, which has a very high cost of living, as we all know. Certainly, you will use those funds in order to survive during your retirement. Obviously, we're going to get into more detail when we look at the regulations. This is simply amendments to the existing Principal Act. The details of all of the two components we'll discuss when we get regulations on it. So I won't intend to get into the questions which I have there. I'll leave that until we get to the regulations phase. But certainly, I would support this legislation, recognizing the hardships that many are under. And as I say, I'll just my usual note of caution about dipping into pension funds, because you will need them eventually. And with those remarks, Madam President, I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jardine. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? No, then Senator No one else has indicated that they want to speak on. I did ask. So then, would any other senator care to speak on this bill? There's no response. So, Senator.
Madam President.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Yes, I had actually tried the messaging system there.
Senator Judith Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to you and my fellow senators and the listening public. I wanted to echo. Sorry.
Senator Richardson, carry on. Jarian Richardson, carry on.
Thank you. I wanted to echo the comments of Senator Jardine in relation to that useful information provided by Senator Campbell. And seeing the use and the utility of the hardship provisions under our pension legislation. I'm very mindful of Senator Campbell's comments that relates to how we have to balance the hardship that is being experienced right now against the future. Senator Jones was eloquently brought up how we are saving for, or rather, we use this hardship to pay for a rainy day. But this is more than just a rainy day. To that end, we have to recognize the hardships that are experienced by our fellow Bermudians and island residents, and I empathize and sympathize with them in this troubling time. I'd like to commend the Pension Commission for offering the financial awareness campaign to go along with these provisions and these amendments in legislation. But I wanted to add that in this pandemic, individual hardship is a piece of a wider national hardship, a hardship with which we have yet to fully contend with and understand. And it is not unreasonable to say that we have nearly exhausted our ability to fund certain social safety nets. And to that end, we are, or this legislation is authorizing persons to withdraw from their future, and certainly from their future selves. Given that there is a lack of understanding about the extent of the national hardship to come and how that will yet again reinforce or I should say pressure our individual financial situations, this legislation, as needed as it is, as a single piece, is undoubtedly not sufficient for the totality of the circumstances we face. So to that end, I look forward to the government's proposals to expand and address this wider hardship that individually the families will, in the short term, be able to navigate their immediate troubles, but there is going to be substantial second waves of trouble. and I look forward to what their plans are in that regard.
Yes.
To that end, I would recommend that we are more assertive in our financial awareness. There is relatively little in our current education or in our current maturing in this space, growing up in Bermuda, where financial awareness is really taught to us. It's very much something you learn along the way. And to that end, I think that as Senator Jones had made the point, we have to recognize that Bermuda, all of our wider society is changing to such an extent that finances are no longer a good to know. It is now going to be absolutely essential that every one of us is as conversant as possible in our financial arrangements, especially given that we are going to be withdrawing from our future to pay for this immediate hardship. To that end, I would recommend that financial awareness is not just a nice to have, and it's not just a campaign, but in some way, shape, or fashion that we are assertive about it. Insofar as we can make sure that as a wider society, there is a median level of information that would be helpful to all of us. And to that end, I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Judith Richardson. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill?
Good morning. Yes, Madam President. Anthony?
Yes, you have the floor.
Good morning to you, Madam President, our fellow senators, and members of the listening audience. Just want to add a few comments, actually, from a general perspective, and that is on the basis that we have to, first of all, I believe, think to some degree of the historical development of pensions in Bermuda. And my experience will come more from the public sector in terms of working for the government previously, and that we originally had the Pensions Act 1970, which officially covered what we generally refer to as white-collar employees. And then in 1981, we introduced the Public Service Superannuation Act for what we call the blue-collar workers. And if anyone took the time to examine the content or the difference between those two, you would understand that there has always been a difference in the preparation for different classes of workers based upon those acts. And what I mean by that very briefly is that the original Act 1970 included the white-collar workers and not the blue-collar workers, and so automatically you had a disadvantage for the blue-collar workers up until 1981. And then there are some other differences in the actual ability at a pension. And so in 1998, when the National Pension Scheme was introduced, it did create to some degree a level playing field. But prior to that, many in the private sector did not even have the benefit of a pension at all upon retirement. And very often what happened was they would work for many, many years, get to a stage of retirement, and then what they would receive is a nice gift, but not a pension scheme. And so if we fast forward to today, I think we have to recognize the fact that the current opportunity is a necessary opportunity for all persons that are currently undergoing financial hardship. And I do not believe that the current financial hardship has any limits. We are all going to be subject to that, given where we are and also the impact of COVID-19. And so my point is that each of us have to carefully consider we have to carefully consider our personal circumstances as we go through the process of deciding the degree to which we may or may not participate in this hardship withdrawal. And important to everyone, while we are in the midst of this challenge, is to consider what we will do if we do all the funds.
I don't know whose mic it is. So, yeah. And then this one.
she's talking.
Anthony's talking, so
Just go down.
this one.
You gotta come back over here. Bring the motion.
Why is it? It's Simmons. Okay.
Can I continue?
Yes, please carry on, Senator Anthony Richardson.
No problem. So my next point was that for each of us, we have to obviously consider our personal circumstances before deciding how to participate in what is definitely a good measure that's being put forward by the government. For the economy group, I think it's going to be interesting to see how many people do participate in the withdrawal, because that's going to have a big impact on the overall economy. If we think about the multiples of 12,000 that might participate. And so I think that's going to be important for all of us to observe. And as Senator Campbell has already given to us, it's the stats as to what has been withdrawn in the past. And as Senator Jardine just said, it's been interesting to see that people have been responsible in the context that most withdrawals have been for education. And so it's going to be interesting going forward to see that continued level of responsibility and decisions on how all the money is withdrawn and subsequently paid. I do note that one of the earlier comments talked about the fact that people might withdraw the money and pay down existing debt. But even that is a good thing to do, because if I pay down my existing debt, it means that I'll then have other funds to use on a more discretionary manner. And to underscore also what some other answers have said, it's going to be important for us, Bermuda generally, to undertake some significant opportunities to better understand the ideas of how to budget, how to spend, how to plan, and for all of us individually to determine how we're going to be more disciplined financially. And so to the extent that Anthony used to go and buy certain things, he cannot do that right now under the current context, because my revenue is not going to allow that to take place. And while each of us have significant personal desires, we have to put those in check in order to sustain ourselves going forward. And my final comment is that pensions generally are described as saving for tomorrow. But I want to underscore that the value of this act right now is that there is actually no tomorrow without a today. And what I mean by that is that if I cannot get through today, I'm not going to have a tomorrow. And so by all means, it is very practical today to access the funds that I do have for any emergency needs, but keeping an eye on the fact that there will be a tomorrow. And so the conundrum for all of us is going to be how critical is the need today that we'll access these funds as against to our tomorrow, which will come later, maybe at retirement, for example. Then we have to then decide how to spend. And so it's just to really be careful, very, very careful in terms of the decision to withdraw the funds and then how those funds are going to be spent. And also to ensure, or certainly for elderly persons, that they don't withdraw the funds and then allow their children or family members to effectively take advantage of the funds, because as we all know, $12,000 is not going to go that far if suddenly everybody comes and needs to borrow or otherwise get money from mommy or granny or whatever the case may be. And so I think it's going to be quite a bit of need also to protect seniors who may be vulnerable from their family members. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Anthony Richardson. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill?
Madam President.
Madam AG?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Madam President, so this bill is one of several social policy initiatives that the government has introduced to address the financial needs of members in the community. And the Minister of Finance has actually correctly struck the right balance between the long-term implications on a person's retirement income and the very apparent and immediate needs of members in the community. They've actually gotten the balance right. And whilst the government has and will provide economic support to those in need of support financially during these challenging times, in keeping with responsible leadership, as Senator Campbell previously stated, the Pension Commission will, in fact, be requested to engage in financial awareness and financial planning campaigns. Fascinating. There is a phrase that I'd like to remind senators of, and I've listened very closely to the discourse around this particular initiative. And that phrase is, who feels it knows it. So the day of reckoning is actually not in the future, it's now. Because it's quite apparent to me that the future will be very different and it will present its own very unique challenges. This legislation is not intended to be a long-term solution. But when you have families that are living from paycheck to paycheck, they actually look to our government for leadership and support. But more so, they need and require our empathy. We sit today as senators who are employed. So as we exercise our responsibilities to scrutinize legislation and to advocate for protection of the public purse, I'd like to take a moment to remind senators that our advocacy must include as a primary focus, particularly at this time, a commitment to ensure that people's fundamental human rights, their basic needs, are actually met as far as we can contribute to that exercise. So I feel very privileged today, Madam President, to know where my family's next meal is coming from. But we can all accept and acknowledge that there's a large segment of the community that's not in that position. So I encourage senators to put aside the political jargon, to do the necessary scrutiny that's required as a part of our mandate, but to ensure as we embark upon this very long road to collaboratively devise legislative solutions to this pandemic, that we do not forget that we are actually responsible for human needs, and our primary emotion should be empathy. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Kathy Lynn Simmons, AG and government leader in the Senate. Would anybody else, would any other senator care to speak on this bill?
I would, Madam President. Senator Robinson.
Senator Robinson, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Just so that we can underscore a very important point here with this legislation. It is not lost on the opposition that there are Bermudians out there that are in dire need and require this legislation in order to feed their family. And most of us are receiving these stories every day as we conduct our various philanthropy and engagement with the community. What I will say that as leaders and as appointed leaders and as elected leaders, it is also our duty to ensure that when we do take these sort of measures, that we take into account that a future is also in the equation. So we have young folks who are struggling as well and will not have up to $12,000 in their pension, and they're allowed to withdraw up to $12,000. So if we are just looking at the legislation as it is, a young person could potentially withdraw a significant amount of their pension that may somewhat empty it. If this is the case, we as leaders have to also look at the measures in which we can do for the future to ensure that folks who are withdrawing from their pensions in order to sustain their families now will have an opportunity to replenish that account for when they retire later. The issue is that the opposition is trying to drive forward here is that we don't want to be kicking a can down the road. If we are to pass this legislation, which obviously we will as the opposition is in support of it, we have to make sure that later on we have an economy, we have job opportunities, and we have a direction that allows folks to be able to replenish those funds, or all we're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. At the end of the day, my leader has eloquently laid out the necessary steps needed in order to ensure that this country moves in the direction it needs to recover post-COVID-19. Now, the opposition is definitely supportive of bipartisan efforts regarding the health and safety of Bermudians. But regarding this particular legislation, which is more so on the social and economic side, we have to outline the fact that if people are going to withdraw from this, we have to make sure that they will be able to replenish it. And as the current state of the economy is, and the current state of the economic direction, that does not look like it will be the case. So the next step is to talk about how can we, as a government, I mean, all of us as elected officials, concoct ways in which the government can become more efficient and have more funds available to it to complement this particular legislation. We cannot ask people who are struggling and starving if they need a loaf of bread, because yes, they will say yes. But if we as leaders haven't said, well, we have 12 loaves of bread in storage, then all we're doing is emptying out the storage with no way of replenishing it, which is only going to lead to those same folks needing more in the future that we cannot provide. So yes, we have to make sure families can support themselves. Yes, we have to make sure that we can pass short-term fixes, but we also have to make sure that those folks who are using the short-term fixes to sustain their families have long-term fixes in the works. And that is something that at the moment, the opposition is unsure about. So yes, I will support this legislation because I do know plenty of people who need to withdraw these funds for emergency reasons and to pay their next bill or to feed their families. But at the same time, it is remiss of me as somebody in a leadership position and all of us if we do not urge our colleagues to share the financial load, to urge the government to curb its spending so that it will be able to sustain the people with more social endeavors in the future. So with those comments, Madam President, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dwayne Robinson. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? No, then Senator Campbell, it's over to you. There are a couple of questions that's been put forward.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank my fellow senators for their support and also their concerns, because rest assured, the government has wrestled with their same concerns when it comes to persons accessing their pension funds. It's not lost on the government that granting too much access, particularly in a short period of time, will have considerable implications for the long-term viability of a retiree's pension. We have certain measures or reasons why you can access funds. Rest assured, those aren't the exhaustive list of requests that the government is approached to allow access for. And the government takes its responsibility, the long-term responsibility, serious. So we only have 4 or 5 areas where people can access their pensions from under hardships. But rest assured, there are many more requests that the government receives. Madam President, we heard lots of comments about the future. And I believe Madam AG summarized when she said that, maybe not in these words, but the future is now for some of our citizens. The hardship that they face has brought their future forward to today. Young persons, as long as they are employed, will make contributions, and they have a number of years. They have 20, 30, and in some cases, maybe even 40 years and more to make future contributions to their pension. But for some, the future is now. Madam President, there was a question around the application process, and that application process, Madam President, is covered under the regulations, which we will go into later in this session once we finish this bill. So we could ask the Senator Jones to hold off. He will see within those regulations, which I would imagine he has read, that he will see the application process clearly laid out in those regulations. There was also a question around why the date of the 30th of June 2021. Madam President, no one knows how long the impact of the COVID-19 will go on, how far into the future we'll feel the economic impact in particular. It must be remembered that this legislation only provides for a one-time withdrawal of $12,000. And so the 30th, it was felt by Cabinet that the date of 30th of June was a deadline far enough into the future that will enable those persons who may not need to take advantage of that withdrawal right now to be able to do so at least for a little more than the next year, should their circumstances, their financial conditions worsen. Madam President, I can't remember the specifics or the specific situation that Senator Jones referred to, but I will answer what I believe the question was in this way. And if I do not answer the question, then I will have to defer an answer to Senator Jones later on. It's a bit dodgy when you take on specific cases. But first of all, Madam President, the 12,000 one-time, up to $12,000 one-time withdrawal is not applicable for those who have already retired. So I'm not sure if that answers Senator Jones' question as to why that person was denied. There's also the element that annuities are not eligible, as an individual would have entered into an unbreakable contract with an insurance company in that scenario. And in accepting a person's funds, the insurance company is guaranteed them that person's monthly pension, irrespective of the investment market swings. And so if that individual did enter into annuity, that is a caution that we would like to put out there. You know, one must be careful when entering into any pension contract. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or questions that Senator Jones had around that individual instance. But at this time, that's the best I can do with the information that I heard being asked. I believe that takes care of all of the question, Madam President.
Yes, so carry on, Senator Campbell.
So with that, Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
Madam President, I move that Standing Order 26 be suspended in respect of this bill.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on.
Madam President, I move that the bill entitled National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020 be now read a third time.
Is there any objection to the third reading? No objection.
Madam President, I move that the bill do now pass.
It has been moved that the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2020 do not pass. Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. The bill is passed. Thank you, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President.
We will now move on to the second order of the day, and that is consideration of the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020. And I believe, Senator Campbell, that is your bill as well. We'll give you
That's
other
correct.
minutes.
That's correct, Madam President. Madam President, may I make a suggestion that we do the remaining two bills in the reverse order? I think it ties into the legislature just passed a bit more tidily.
Certainly. Yes, you may certainly do that.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that Standing Order 71-2 be suspended so that the Senate may now proceed with consideration of the two sets of draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Refund Temporary Regulations 2020 and the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
With your permission, Just Grant. The National Pension Scheme 2020.
Is there any objection to that motion?
However, to increase efficiency and timeliness of refunds, the applications for these refunds will be managed and processed by the pension plan administrators. Madam President, it is believed this will make the process more efficient as the administrators would have more staff and resources collectively than the pension commission. Madam President, these regulations provide various checks and balances to ensure applications are correct and that plan members only apply once in a lifetime and limit the withdrawal to not more than $12,000 for all accounts held by the applicant. Madam President, the Pension Commission is currently preparing guidance notes for the administrators to ensure this process runs smoothly and so that we can put money into members' pockets as soon as possible. Madam President, the specifics of the proposed regulations are as follows. Regulation 1 is self-explanatory and provides for the citation of the regulations. Regulation 2 inserts various definitions. Regulation 3 provides for those that can apply under the regulations and the time limit for making such applications. And as we have heard in discussing the previous piece of legislation, all applications must be made before the 30th of June, 2021. Regulation 4 provides for the process for applying for a refund. Regulation 5 enables persons with more than one account to submit an application for any or all of their accounts, but limits the total refund to $12,000. Regulation 6 requires a written statement of account to be received by an applicant from an administrator within 7 working days of Regulation 7 provides for the handling of incomplete or defective applications. And it should be noted that the applicant has a time period specified by the administrator within which to complete or remedy the application. Regulation 8 provides for the consideration of applications by administrators and restrictions on approving such applications. The key note here, Madam President, is that the vested portion only is considered by the administrator when determining the funds available. Regulation 9 provides for the decisions of administrators and notification of such to applicants. And again, Madam President, if the application is approved, it must state the amount of the refund. If the application is denied, it must state the reason why it was denied. And these must be communicated in writing to the applicant. Regulation 10 provides for the payment of refunds for any approved applications within 20 working days. Regulation 11 prohibits read the list of requirements, Madam President.
You certainly may. Carry on, Senator.
So that information contained in that report should include a list of all applications made to the administrator under these regulations. In respect of each application, the following particulars: the administrator's decision, where the application was approved, the amount of the refund paid to the applicant, where the application was denied, the reason for the denial, and any other information that the commission may reasonably require. And Regulation 15, Madam President, deals with the commencement of the regulations. And these regulations will come into operation on such a day as the minister appoints by notice published in the official gazette. So with that, Madam President, I will pause to allow my fellow senators to comment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Would any senator care to speak on these regulations? Any senator?
Madam President?
Senator Jardine?
I just had one question. I thought that the regulation. So I just had one question, and it relates to section 4. It says the applicant shall provide such documents and information requested by the administrator that will assist the administrator in determining the application. So presumably, and this is going to be a question to the Senator, Senator Campbell, presumably then the administrator is given some guidance by the pension commission as to the criteria for approving this benefits. I assume that must be the case, and that's just the question I had. Is presumably the pension commission is engaging with administrators to say, it has to be a hardship case and has to ask for the following information. Just a question. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank Thank you, Senator Jardine. Would any other senator care to speak on these regulations? Oh, sorry.
Madam President?
Yes, sorry, Senator
Sorry,
Campbell. You
Yes,
can respond.
I was asking if Senator Jardine can repeat his question because it was a bit muffled from my side.
Okay, Senator Jardine, would you repeat your question, please?
Yes, certainly, Madam President. The question I have related to section 4 of the regulation, where it said the applicant shall provide such documents and information requested by the administrator in writing and can assist the administrator in determining the application. My question really to Senator Campbell is, presumably the pension commission or the government is engaging with these administrators and saying, here's some guidance as to what you should be looking for in approving this application. And presumably it's based on some form of hardship. I don't know. The administrator must have some guidance. That's it.
Senator Campbell, was it clear at this time?
Yes, it was much clearer. Thank you, Madam President.
Good, you can respond.
I would respond at the end, Madam President.
Fine, thank you. Would any other senator care to speak on these regulations? No one is indicating. Senator Campbell, it appears that no one else has indicated they want
Okay, Madam President. Then, in response to Senator Jardine's question, the guidance will be provided by the Commission to the plan administrators to cover such matters.
That's fine. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. You can now move your regulations.
First of all, Madam President, I want to thank my fellow senators for their support. Madam President, I move that the said draft regulations be approved and that the following message be sent to His Excellency the Governor. May it please Your Excellency, the Senate, having had under consideration the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Refund Temporary Regulations 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister of Finance under the provisions of Section 249C and 69 of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act 1998, has the honor to inform Your Excellency that the Senate has approved the said draft regulations.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President.
He hasn't said the suitable message. Okay. Thank you, Senator Campbell. We'll now move on item number 14, motions. There are none.
So we got one more, Madam President.
Oh, you did. Sorry, I said to be jumping the ground. All right, you move on to the third set of regulations. I'm sorry.
Madam President, I move that the Senate now take under consideration the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I am pleased to present the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020 for the consideration of the Senate. Madam President, late last year, the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2019 provided, amongst other things, for a member or former member of a pension plan or local retirement account to receive a refund of up to 25% of their account balance, provided they had attained normal retirement age 65 and had retired. Madam President, the government's policy objective was then and is still now that retirees should have greater access to their pension funds in order to assist them with their financial needs and plans during their retirement years. Indeed, Madam President, such enhanced access is becoming more common amongst developed countries. Madam President, it's becoming more common amongst developed countries occupational pension schemes, and these regulations provide the framework for applying for the refund and other related matters, such as the manner of making applications, a statement of account, incomplete or defective applications, considerations of the applications, determining the amount of the refund, notification of the Commission's decision, record keeping, payment to an applicant, prohibition on the imposition of charges by an administrator, administrator compliance with the regulations, commencement of the regulations, and supplementary provisions. Madam President, the specifics of the proposed regulations are as follows. Regulation 1 is self-explanatory and provides for the citation of the regulations. Regulation 2 inserts various definitions. Regulation 3 provides for those that can apply under the regulations. Regulation 4 provides for various application requirements. Regulation 5 requires a statement of account to be provided to the applicant from an administrator within 7 working days. And it should be noted, Madam President, that the date of that relevant statement must be within 30 days of the date of the application to the Pension Commission. Regulation 6 provides for the handling of incomplete or defective applications. Regulation 7 provides for the consideration of applications by the Commission and restrictions on approving such applications. And it again should be noted that the Commission shall not approve more than one application during the lifetime of an applicant. Regulation 8 provides for the consideration of an applicant's vested amounts only. Regulation 9 provides for Commission's notification to an applicant of its decision, and it provides that it must be in writing and also for the minimum content of that notification. Regulation 10 provides for record keeping by the Commission. Regulation 11 specifies the requirements by administrators to make payments within 20 working days of receipt of direction from the Commission. Regulation 12 prohibits administrators from imposing a charge in performing their duties or requirements under the regulations. Regulation 13 provides for the administrators' compliance with the regulations, notwithstanding any contrary terms of a pension plan or local retirement product, and having regard to any advice or guidance issued by the Commission. Regulation 14 provides for commencement of the regulations, and it states that they would come into operation on such day as the Minister appoints by notice in the Gazette. And with that, Madam President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Would any senator care to speak on these regulations? No one has indicated they wanted to speak.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, senators, for your support. So, Madam President, I move that the draft regulations be approved and that the following message be sent to His Excellency, the Governor. May it please Your Excellency, the Senate, having had under consideration the draft regulations entitled the National Pension Scheme Lump Sum Refund Retiree Regulations 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister of Finance under the provisions of sections 24(9)(b) and 69 of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act 1998, has the honor to inform Your Excellency that the Senate has approved the said draft regulations.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection, Senator Campbell. a suitable message will be sent to the governor. Thank you, and thank you all, senators.
Thank you, Madam President.
We now move on to item number 14 on our orders of the day. There are none. Item number 15, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches. Would any senator care to speak on this?
Okay, Madam President?
We will do. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, we will do. Senator Richardson?
No, Madam President, just two quick notes in terms of condolences. One is to Mr. Davis Tennant,
Yes.
who passed recently. I know him as a church member, and the one thing that I always remember about him is that he had a very fervent commitment to his children, and believed that his duty as a father was to ensure that they were as best he could, that they were financially stable prior to his passing. And the other person actually I want to mention is Mr. Richard Butterfield. I knew him because he was a former partner at Price Waterhouse when I articled, I guess, many years ago now. And the one thing that always struck me about him was that he was very, very polite, very firm, but very polite, and was one that had tremendous influence in the community and shared his wisdom widely, and was to some degree known, and other degree not known, as a very, very firm supporter of the arts. And many times he talked about the fact that he would have liked for the City Hall to be developed even further into an actual performing arts hall, if you will. And so I just want to give those words and offer condolences to each of their families. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Richardson. And senators, I just been reminded that we did have a senator who passed this morning. We were just a former senator, Senator Llewellyn Peniston. So I'm asking senators that we have a moment of silence for him, and I'm suggesting that we have a minute of silence. Thank you. The minute has passed. Thank you, senators. Now, would any other senator care to speak on?
Madam President?
Yes, Senator Jardine, you have the floor.
Madam President, I'd just like to be associated with Mr. Anthony Richardson's comments about Dick Butterfield. I also knew him very well when I was practicing as a father young, and lives close by. I used to see him as quite frequently. And when I served on the Corporation of Hamilton as alderman, he was frequently there working on, as Senator Richardson has said, trying to build an arts center there. And certainly we were at the corporation very supportive of his move to do that. It was unfortunately due to lack of funds that never actually, a separate building never transpired, but certainly should be remembered and recognized for his contribution to the arts. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Jardine. Would any other senator care to speak on the congratulations? Sorry, who, Senator?
Jerry and Richardson.
I beg your pardon. Senator Jerry and Richardson, you have the floor.
Yes, I just wanted to extend the condolences on behalf of the OBA senators for the family of Stanley Liu. We had occasion to share some recollections, and I just wanted to note or put forward that some time ago, when I was a trainee reporter, I would go to the House of Assembly, and at the time there was a press bench not far from where the speaker was. And it isn't, not speaking out of school, to say that there have been times of contention between the media and some members of Parliament at that time. And so we would, glares were not unusual, or perhaps a sucking of the teeth. Mr. Lowe was the kindest person in the room to me, a very, very young man trying to figure out my way in life. He was always the first person to slap you on the back. He was the first person to say hello. He was so dignified. He was so calm. He made me have to think about the kind of person I would be in life. And later on, when I moved into the police service, and I remember patrolling in his constituency, and he just always came to mind. I never had an occasion to speak with him at length, and I never had the occasion to tell him how much I admired him. But I wanted to be known that he was a person who made not just me, but a lot of young men better, because he showed us what that meant. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Senator Judith Richardson. Would any other senator care to speak on the congratulatory or obituary speeches? No. Then, senators, I would ask your consideration, as I would like to. This is the first opportunity that we have had to really address the congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, and it would be remiss of me not to express condolences on our behalf to the former President of the Senate, Mrs. Carol Ann Bassett. I know that her husband passed in April, but I think as this is the first opportunity that we're addressing the topic, I thought that we should extend condolences to her on behalf of the death of her husband, Mr. Roderick Bassett, in early April. I think that Mr. Bassett, he was at the time a member of the Swans running club in Bermuda for several years. He was an avid sportsman, and he ran in several overseas marathons, including in New York, Boston, Chicago, Washington, but his favorite one was in Peachtree in Atlanta, where he apparently ran for 20 times. So he was a God-fearing man, and between them they had 3 sons. So I would like for the Senate to agree that we extend our heartfelt condolences to Senator Carol Ann Bassett, former president, because she was the first female president of the Senate during her 14-year tenure here. And with that, and I would also like to indicate that with respect to Stanley Lowe, I'm sure that each one of us extend condolences to the family. But I just want to indicate that the Speaker, Speaker Lister, and MP Kim Swan did have an online memorial for the Speaker over a 4-hour period, and I listened to most of it, and it was really an excellent response, and I think that our thanks go to them for doing so. Additionally, the government did have an online memorial for the Speaker, in which many people signed a memorial for him, and this was to be presented in a booklet form to the family. So I think that we would like to support that effort and to thank both the Speaker Lister and MP Swan, as well as the government, for doing so. And also now, as each one of you know, I am a nurse, and this is Nurses Week. I want to say that the ICN's theme for International Nurses Day is Nurses, a Voice to Lead, Nursing the World to Health, with a focus on the value of nurses to the people of the world, and Bermuda obviously included. And I just want to also say that nurses are central to addressing a wide range of health challenges. And I myself, those of you who know, I have been a nurse over several years, working in practically all the fields of nursing, delivering babies, working in general nursing as well as in ICU. So I really feel for those nurses who we see on television who are working in the ICU departments. And even though I had worked in an ICU department for 4 years at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, I can tell you when I observe what those nurses have to put up with and to do, I feel so heartfelt for them, because many of these people in an ICU under this pandemic, they cannot be supported by their families. And the nurses have to play not only a double role of treating them, attending to them, but also trying to support them through this crisis. And they've had so many times had to watch them pass away without their loved ones by them. So I really feel really sorry when I look at that. And I know that, you know, the stress that the nurses must feel having to deal with that. And repeatedly, as you observe all the deaths that have occurred during this pandemic. And on I suppose, a better note, a higher note, I would just like to commend Mrs. Judith Richardson at the Bermuda Hospitals Board, who has been appointed the Nurse of the Year for 2020. And I'd just like to extend our congratulations to her for a stellar performance. And I've known her for many, many years when I was working at the hospital. And so I just want to extend our congratulations and best wishes to her. Thank you. And now we will move on to our last item, which is adjournment. Would any, Madam AG.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the Senate do now adjourn to Wednesday, May 20th, sorry.
For Wednesday, May the 30th. Would any senator,
20th.
I beg your pardon. Would any senator care to speak on the motion to adjourn?
Yes, Madam President.
Yeah.
Senator Richardson, I'd like to speak.
Senator Jerry Richardson, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and fellow senators, and again, the listening public. I just wanted to raise a warning about some of the comments I've been seeing in the media and in our social media about our political discourse in Bermuda. There are some comments floating around that refer to playing politics or politicizing issues. And whether intentionally or unintentionally, these comments can reduce our regard for our political process and discourse. It can make it appear either frivolous or trivial. Our politics is neither a game, nor is it so irrelevant that it should be diminished or disregarded in such a manner. Whether it was Plato's Republic or Machiavelli, politics is seminal to our society, and in a very real sense to us, in a day-to-day basis, our politics is how we navigate conflict, our conflicting opinions, without reducing that engagement to insulting one another or to intimidation or violence. Our politics is about mutual accountability. It's holding power in check. And I'm mindful that in times of crisis, it is too easy to slip into blind devotion to power. But if we treat our politics as if it is anything less serious than all of our societal discourse and civility, then we're going to risk our ability to engage in contest or to contest with each other in a civilized and dignified manner. I'm mindful that also as we make it frivolous, we're running the risk of surrendering that right of discourse, and we're going to regress to a point of us and them without any way to establish commonality and to bring life to our individual aspirations, as well as the hope of our future generations. So I just wanted to, in so much as possible, whether it be again in the media or in social media or when referring to one another as politicians, that that we encourage the respect of politics, that it never be trivialized, because it strikes me as being so necessary to navigating conflict, to establishing cooperation, and to moving into our future. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Jerry and Richardson. Would any other senator care to speak on the motion to adjourn?
Yes, Madam President. Can you hear me, Madam President?
Yes, sorry. Senator Simmons? Anthea Wade, Simmons Wade. You can have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to my fellow senators in the listening audience. Madam President, Bermuda, like the rest of the world, is facing the potential destructive impacts of COVID-19. It doesn't care who you are, what you believe in, where you live, there is no distinction. Our government has taken decisive actions to minimize the impact, slow the rate, and decrease community transmission. In order to flatten the curve, the following measures have been taken. Our borders have been closed, testing was increased, social distancing, curfews, and shelter in place, and the implementation of a phased approach for reopening our island and ultimately our economy. This virus and its effects are moving at a very rapid pace, and we must stay ahead of it. The Bermuda government has increased their testing capacity and reduced cost to taxpayers by opening a new lab in Southside with the aid of Dr. Weldon. Bermuda is ranked highest per capita in the region in terms of testing. Bermuda is ranked 11th in the world in terms of per capita testing. The drive-through testing in the government lab is being conducted now for no charge. Residents and staff of all 21 restrooms and nursing homes have also been tested. Government has coordinated the donation of additional testing machines. King Edward Hospital has added 48 beds to enhance their ability for patients if need be. The number of ventilators have been increased. In total, 40 public service announcements were created and recorded and posted all on all press conferences. COVID hotline has answered hundreds of calls from the general public. Housing arriving passengers in government quarantine facilities for 14 days and testing them prior to being released has prevented the spread of the disease. Since March the 1st, government has held over 47 press conferences. We currently have 121 confirmed positive cases, 47 active cases, and 8 deaths. In many countries, the virus has now overwhelmed their health system and people are dying on a daily basis. Bermuda public health officials have linked the majority of the cases to overseas travel. Bermuda currently only has local transmission with clusters of cases. A significant increase in positive cases will result in our health system being overwhelmed, which is why we must continue to avoid increasing our levels. This is a reality and a possibility that we must face, as has been the case around the world. Right now, we have an opportunity to slow the rate of transmission in Bermuda and to protect Bermuda from the worst. We must continue to act responsibly by complying with government legislation and regulation. The 4 phases, limiting contact, following all of the guidelines, including social distancing. I understand that self-isolation and social distancing is disconcerting. However, this is the single most important thing that we can do right now to slow the rate of local transmission. This is our best chance to slow the rate of the virus and save lives. These measures have caused unprecedented economic and social disruptions, but they are necessary. As importantly, we must protect and shield our most vulnerable. By lastly, the norm now. The decision was made by government to reduce the contact and long line. If you do not have an immediate need, do not go to the shop. Do not go to the groceries. There will be enough for you today, tomorrow, and the day after that. The Aging Well Committee continues to work on the 9 goals to put seniors and vulnerable persons first. As a result of this pandemic, we will focus on the urgent issues with each goal in order to provide support and assistance with the immediate challenges of our seniors and vulnerable people. Sticking to the rules matters. If you don't, you risk spreading COVID-19 and more importantly, extending everyone's time in phase 1. These measures have been put in place by our government are preventing our being in the worst case scenario. Everything you have to give up or will continue to have to give up over the next couple of months will literally save lives, hundreds of lives. On a positive note, Geneva-based World Health Organization is leading a global-wide initiative to develop safe, effective vaccines and drugs to diagnose, prevent, and treat COVID-19. This respiratory illness, 4.1 billion people around the world. The government encourages all Bermudians to complete IQ. This is Bermuda Health Council's online tool that will assist the community and our vets to progress from phase 1 to phase 4 of COVID restriction. The tool will help our public health teams identify and resource. Government is also encouraging every Bermudian to get their free COVID-19 test at the government's outside lab. This will prevent people who are asymptomatic from unknowingly transmitting to your family, friends, and colleagues. The government will continue to do all it can to protect you, but we need you to do everything you can to protect our fellow Bermudians. Your actions will be critical to our collective ability to stop the spread of COVID-19. Failure to play your part will put the lives of others at risk. We are in this together, and we must unite against COVID-19. As a country, we must work together as this affects all of us. Together, we can do this. We must continue to flatten the curve. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Simmons-Wade. Would any other senator care to speak? No, then I would just like to add that I'm sure that each one of the senators and everyone in Bermuda supports the comments that you have just made, Senator Simmons-Wade, and we thank you for that. Senators, the Senate stands adjourned. Oh, Madam AG, did you want to?
Yes, I'm sorry, Madam President.
I'm sorry, I was looking for you.
That's fine. I just wanted to end on a positive note. Of course, we all associate ourselves with the remarks and the areas that were given earlier. I want to just talk about something positive, which is to applaud our parents and caregivers in Bermuda right now. I can honestly say that I have friends and acquaintances who have never ever had to spend this much time in the presence of their kids. And when you consider that most of us are at work and the kids are at school, it has been the most interesting, challenging, and trying time for lots of our parents. And as I go about with my exercise, you see parents walking with children, whole families out exercising, which is something new for Bermuda. But you also have the very huge challenge of entertaining these little people, which most people are finding extremely challenging. And when you look at the way we live in our lives right now, where we have all sorts of technological tools for entertainment, I would hazard a guess and say it's been, in a lot of cases, a very healthy change for our families. Of course, being in close quarters for long periods of time, it challenges challenges most of us, including our in-person relationships, but to the parents who have been able to be creative and patient with their young people, I think we would all give them a huge round of applause. This situation is not going to leave us anytime soon. And so to parents and caregivers, you have our, oh my gracious, our support. And we acknowledge the efforts that you are making to keep your young people safe and entertained. I'd also, Madam President, really quickly like to acknowledge the young people who have stepped up to help in the health profession during this pandemic. I mean, we've seen the excellence of Dr. Weldon. We also have M.A. Fogo, and we have a whole team of young people who have gotten on board at the Premier's instigation to assist. And it does bode well for our future to see that we're able to harness the collective intelligence and skills of these young people and to give them a place of ownership in Bermuda to assist and to further hone their skills in our community. So to all of them and to the nurses who are on the front line, I'd like to just reach out and say heartfelt thanks from all of us. And with that, Madam President, I'm over to you.
Thank you, Senator Kathleen Simmons. And with that, the Senate stands adjourned until May the 20th. And thank you all for your presence and your input this morning.
Thank you, Madam President.
Yep.
We sign off.